Imagine the weight of chains not just on your wrists, but on your soul, knowing a secret that could save hundreds from a hellish death, yet speaking it means your own execution. In the fever-soaked shadows of 1822 Natchez, one enslaved man heard the whispers of the divine in dying breaths, and chose to defy the gods of men. But would his forbidden knowledge redeem a city, or summon retribution from above? In the sweltering haze of 1822, where the Mississippi River coiled like a serpent through the heart of the American South, death arrived not with a thunderclap, but with the insidious buzz of wings too small to see. Natchez, Mississippi, perched arrogantly on its bluffs, gazed down at the muddy artery that fed its wealth, cotton bales stacked like altars to greed, steamboats churning the water into froth, and enslaved bodies bent under the sun's unyielding judgment. This was a place where prosperity bloomed from blood-soaked soil, where mansions with marble columns and silk-draped parlors hid the screams of the fields below. But beneath the veneer of southern elegance lurked a biblical reckoning: yellow fever, the yellow jack, a plague that turned vibrant lives into withered husks, their eyes jaundiced like cursed gold, their vomit black as sin's own ink. At the center of this unfolding apocalypse stood Jonas Ryder, a man whose name history has all but erased, like footprints washed away by the river's tide. Born into bondage in 1788 on a Louisiana sugar plantation, Jonas was no stranger to the divine lottery of survival. His earliest memory was the auction block in New Orleans, a cacophony of bids and wails where he clung to his mother's skirt, her calloused hands gripping his as if to anchor him against the storm. 8 years old, strong back, quick learner, the auctioneer barked, his voice slicing through the humid air like a whip. Separated from his father that day, a shadowy figure Jonas could only recall as a deep rumble of laughter and the scent of tobacco. Mother and son were sold northward to the Fairmont plantation, 10 miles from Natchez. There, under the watchful eyes of overseers with coiled lashes and flintlock pistols, Jonas learned the rhythm of oppression: rise before dawn's first blush, toil until stars pierced the velvet sky, and pray that exhaustion claimed you before despair did. The Fairmonts, by the twisted metrics of the era, were benevolent masters. James Fairmont, a wiry man with a powdered wig and a Bible always tucked under his arm, preached sermons on Sundays about God's hierarchy: whites as stewards, blacks as eternal servants, a divine order as immutable as the seasons. Whippings were reserved for insubordination, rations of cornmeal and salted pork doled out just enough to stave off starvation, and the work, picking cotton until fingers bled raw, thorns embedding like thorns of Christ's crown, was relentless but not immediately lethal. Jonas's back bore the faded lattice of scars from a youthful transgression, sneaking extra bread to a pregnant woman in the quarters. The overseer, Mr. Tolbert, had administered 15 lashes, each one a fiery sermon on obedience. But pain forged something unbreakable in Jonas, a quiet resilience, a soul that bent but never shattered. What elevated Jonas beyond the grim arithmetic of survival was his voracious intellect, a gift that burned like a hidden ember in the darkness of illiteracy. Mississippi law forbade teaching enslaved people to read or write, punishable by 39 lashes or worse, for knowledge was the serpent in Eden, tempting the oppressed toward forbidden fruit. Yet Jonas's mind was a vault, absorbing every overheard whisper, every fragment of wisdom like parched earth drinking rain. He memorized the overseer's tallies of crop yields, the planters' discussions of market prices echoing from the big house veranda. In the slave quarters, under the cloak of night, elders shared lore passed down from African shores: roots that eased childbirth pangs, leaves that drew poison from snakebites, poultices that mended festering wounds. Jonas catalogued it all: Lucinda's herb mix for infections, a blend of yarrow and comfrey boiled under a full moon, Thomas's Jamaican remedy for dysentery, chewing bitter bark until the cramps subsided. These weren't mere recipes, they were lifelines, threads of resistance woven into the fabric of endurance. In the spring of 1821, fate, or perhaps Providence, delivered a catalyst to Jonas's quiet rebellion. The Fairmonts attended an estate sale in Louisiana, returning with a new acquisition, a woman named Margot, her price haggled down due to her age and exotic origins. Margot was a specter from distant worlds, born in the sun-baked villages of Senegambia, captured as a girl and shipped across the Atlantic's merciless expanse. She survived the Middle Passage's horrors, chained in fetid holds where death danced among the waves, only to be thrust into Saint-Domingue's plantations during the Haitian Revolution. There, amid uprisings that shook empires, she witnessed the fall of colonial tyrants, her hands stained with the blood of both oppressors and the oppressed. Sold again to Louisiana after the revolution's flames subsided, Margot carried scars not just on her flesh but in her spirit: a missing finger from a machete mishap, a limp from a overseer's boot, and eyes that held the weight of ancestral ghosts. Now in her 50s, her silver hair coiled beneath a faded indigo headwrap, Margot moved with the deliberate grace of one who had outlasted tempests. Her speech was a melodic tangle of French Creole, Wolof inflections, and halting English, words spilling like river stones smoothed by time. The other enslaved at Fairmont eyed her warily. She muttered prayers to forgotten gods under her breath, her gaze piercing as if she could divine secrets from your shadow. Whispers rippled through the quarters. Which woman, spirit talker? But Jonas saw beyond the fear. In Margot's weathered hands lay power, the kind that could tip the scales between life and oblivion. He approached her cautiously, evenings after the fields emptied, sitting cross-legged outside her crude cabin of mud-daubed logs and thatched roof. The air hummed with cicadas, fireflies winking like lost souls in the dusk. At first, she ignored him, grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle, the rhythmic thud echoing like a heartbeat. But persistence wore her down, and soon, stories flowed. Margot spoke of yellow fever's wrath in Senegambia, where it descended like a vengeful deity during rainy seasons, claiming villages in swaths of agony. La Fievre Jaune, she called it, her voice a low incantation, mixing French with African cadences. She described the onset, chills that rattled bones like demonic possession, aches burrowing into the spine as if sin itself clawed from within, eyes yellowing like betrayed gold, and the final horror, the vomito negro, black vomit heralding death's embrace. European doctors, she sneered, their white coats symbols of arrogance, bled patients until they were husks, dosed them with mercury that rotted guts from inside out. They kill more than the spirits do, she spat, her spittle hitting the dirt like a curse. Instead, Margot unveiled ancient wisdom, cinchona bark, which she termed kinakina, boiled precisely, not too hot, lest it lose its potency, into a bitter tea that quelled the fever's fire. Bitter roots to staunch vomiting, leaves to thicken blood thinned by the plague. And crucially, she warned of the bad spirits in the air, mosquitoes, though she knew them not by name but by their swarm near stagnant waters. Burn smoke from sacred wood, cover skin with oil of neem, drain the pools where they breed, she instructed, her hands gesturing like a conjurer. The fever rides on their wings, a messenger of judgment for the wicked. Jonas absorbed it all, his memory etching every detail, ratios of bark to water, steeping times measured by the moon's arc, symptoms to watch like omens in a dream. This knowledge was sacred, a covenant between the living and the ancestors, but perilously forbidden. Enslaved healers who dared challenge white medicine vanished, sold downriver to Louisiana's sugar hills, where the average lifespan was 7 years, or lynched as threats to the divine order. Margot herself walked a razor's edge, her pouch of remedies, a worn leather satchel hidden against her breast, contained essences that could heal or hex, depending on the teller's bias. Their lessons unfolded over months, under starlit skies heavy with jasmine and the distant howl of hounds. Jonas felt a spiritual awakening, as if Margot's words unlocked scriptures hidden in his blood. Themes of redemption wove through her tales, fever as divine retribution for slavery's sins, healing as an act of defiance against man's false gods. The ancestors watch, she murmured one night, firelight dancing on her face like ethereal judgment. Use this, and you carry their fire. But fire burns the hand that holds it wrong. Tragedy struck in October 1821. Margot collapsed amid the cotton rows, her body convulsing under the autumn sun's glare. Jonas rushed to her, cradling her head as sweat beaded like unholy dew. Her eyes, once sharp, dulled to jaundiced orbs, her frame wasted as if the fever had feasted on her soul. The plantation doctor, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth, dismissed it as old age and overwork, prescribing bed rest she wouldn't survive. But Jonas knew better, this was yellow fever's mark, a foe she'd battled thrice before, now claiming victory. In her final hours, delirium parting her lips, she pressed the leather pouch into his palms. Sauve-les, she whispered in French, her voice a fading echo. Save them. Jonas buried her under a gnarled oak, the quarters mourning with hushed spirituals that blended African rhythms with biblical lament. Swing low, sweet chariot, come and for to carry me home. Her death left a void, but her legacy burned in Jonas, a forbidden gospel of healing, poised against the coming storm. The plague slithered into Natchez on June 14, 1822, aboard the steamboat Providence, its paddle wheels churning the river into a frothy omen. Docked at Natchez under the hill, the lawless waterfront sprawl of saloons, brothels, and gambling dens, the vessel unloaded cotton, whiskey, and unwitting doom. Hidden in water barrels and damp holds bred Aedes aegypti mosquitoes, vectors of vengeance, their bites injecting the virus like serpent's venom. The first to fall was Patrick Hannigan, an Irish dockhand with freckled skin and a laugh like rolling thunder. He hauled crates under the midday blaze, sweat mingling with river mist, then caroused in a tavern where cigar smoke hung thick as fog. By dawn, chills racked him, his teeth chattering like bones in a grave. Fever spiked, back pain arched him like a penitent under the lash, jaundice painted his eyes sulphur yellow. Within 72 hours, black vomit sealed his fate, he died gasping, his body consigned to a pauper's pit. Dr. Raymond Fletcher, a fresh-faced physician from Boston, examined the corpse in a dimly lit shack, candlelight flickering over pallid flesh. "Yellow fever," he muttered, the words heavy as lead. He alerted the mayor and the medical board, a cadre of 6 elite doctors led by Dr. Cornelius Howell, a patriarchal figure with wire-rimmed spectacles and a pedigree from the University of Pennsylvania. Convening in an oak-paneled chamber overlooking the bluffs, they debated amid maps and medical tomes. Their doctrine? Miasma theory, plague born of foul vapors from rotting refuse, moral rot in the underbelly's vice dens. Treatments: bleed the tainted blood, purge with mercury, immerse in ice baths to shatter the fever's grip. Posters plastered the city: avoid lowlands, burn tar for pure air, report symptoms at once. Instruments gleamed, lancets sharp as accusations, bowls pristine for crimson floods, vials of calomel promising salvation. But science, in its hubris, mirrored Pharaoh's defiance before the plagues. Cases erupted, 14 by June 20 in the Underhill squalor, 37 by the 23rd, 9 corpses stacked like cordwood. The fever ascended the bluffs, infiltrating Natchez on the hill's opulence. Judge Samuel Fairfax's daughter, Eleanor, 19 and betrothed, succumbed after a fitting in a riverside shop. Her death, a porcelain doll shattered, unleashed panic among the elite. Coffins piled in streets, bells tolled ceaselessly, steamboats veered away like fleeing sinners. Doctors labored heroically yet futilely. Howell bled 40 in a day, his coat crusted maroon. Fletcher dosed mercury until patients retched silver-tainted bile. Survival rates plummeted, treatments weakened bodies, inviting secondary reapers like hemorrhage or organ failure. Pride blinded them, tradition was their idol, unchallenged as scripture. 10 miles north, at Fairmont, dread seeped like fog. Enslaved networks buzzed with tidings: fever's march, doctors' failures. On June 27, it struck: a field hand, Samuel, crumpled mid-row, skin hot as forge coals. 2 more followed by dusk. Overseer Tolbert summoned Dr. Graham, who arrived on horseback, his satchel bulging with lancets and poisons. Jonas assisted, carrying the afflicted to isolation huts, crude sheds reeking of straw and despair. He watched Graham slice veins, blood pooling dark as spilled wine, mercury forced like bitter communion. Silence bound Jonas, to speak was to court the noose. That night, under a moon veiled in clouds, Jonas knelt in his cabin, dirt floor cool against knees. The pouch, Margot's relic, called from its hiding. Cinchona shards, seeds like tiny prayers, roots twisted as fate's threads. Memories flooded, her warnings of divine justice: fever is God's scourge on the unjust. The treatments kill faster than the curse, Jonas realized, clarity piercing like dawn's ray. Knowledge was his cross, inaction, a greater sin. With trembling hands, he prepared the brew, steam rising like incense to unseen judges. Redemption or damnation awaited, but in that moment, Jonas chose to heal, a prophet in chains defying the pharaohs of his world. Word spread through the quarters like wildfire in dry grass. By morning, Jonas administered doses in secret, bitter tea sipped under cover of darkness, mosquito wards of smoldering herbs filling the air with acrid sanctity. 3 lives hung in balance, Jonas's own teetered on the edge. The plantation stirred with whispers: miracle or heresy? As Natchez's toll mounted past 100, families erased in elegant parlors, Jonas confronted eternity's gaze. Would his cure spread like salvation, or ignite the pyre of retribution? Yet the doctors in town, ensconced in their certainties, dismissed rumors from the fields. Jonas, bloodied from labor, approached the medical board one sweltering afternoon, pouch concealed, voice steady as at him. "I have a way," he said, eyes meeting theirs, degrees from ivory towers versus wisdom from earth's bowels. They laughed, coats pristine, minds closed like tombs. Superstition from a slave, Howell scoffed, waving him away. Pride, the deadliest sin, blinded them to the prophet in their midst. As bodies piled, Jonas faced the abyss, obey and watch annihilation, or rebel and court death's embrace. Knowledge criminalized, healing outlawed, yet in his soul burned Margot's mandate, save them. The river whispered secrets, mosquitoes hummed like accusatory angels, and the fever raged on, a divine test of hubris and humility. In the oppressive heat of July 1822, where the Mississippi's humid breath clung to every leaf and stone like a shroud of impending judgment, Jonas Ryder stood at the precipice of his own personal Golgotha. The Fairmont plantation, with its sprawling fields of cotton blooming white as false innocence under the relentless sun, had become both sanctuary and crucible. Here, amid the rhythmic chants of field songs that masked deeper laments, Jonas had already tested Margot's forbidden wisdom in the shadows. 11 souls pulled back from the brink, their fevers broken like chains under divine hammer, while the white doctor's lancets and poisons claimed more victims than the plague itself. But now, the question gnawed at Jonas's spirit like a thorn in flesh: what price was he willing to pay to extend this mercy beyond the plantation's cursed borders? Knowledge, once a quiet ember, now burned as a beacon, drawing moths to its flame, or perhaps angels of wrath. Jonas had witnessed the wages of defiance etched into the very soil of the South. At 16, raw and unbowed by bondage's grind, he had seen Nathan, a towering field hand with calluses thick as leather armor, step into the storm of injustice. It was a sweltering afternoon, the air thick with dust from freshly turned earth, when Overseer Tolbert, his face flushed red as hellfire, raised his bullwhip over a trembling boy accused of pilfering cornmeal from the storehouse. The boy's eyes, wide with terror, reflected the sun's glare like polished onyx. "Thief!" Tolbert bellowed, his voice echoing across the fields like a judge's gavel. But Nathan, unable to swallow the lie, strode forward, his bare feet sinking into the warm loam. "It weren't him, sir," Nathan said, his baritone steady, though his hands trembled at his sides. "I seen the real one, old Caleb from the mill. Boy's innocent as the lamb." The world froze in that moment, the whip hovering mid-arc like a serpent poised to strike. Tolbert's eyes bulged with fury, veins pulsing in his neck like rivers of rage. An enslaved man contradicting a white overseer? It was blasphemy against the divine order preached from pulpits and enforced with iron. Nathan seized the whip's tail in a grip forged from years of toil, holding it for 3 eternal seconds, time enough for triumph to flicker in his gaze, a spark of humanity reclaiming its fire. But retribution was swift as lightning. Tolbert's pistol cracked the air, not to kill, but to summon guards. Nathan was dragged away, chains rattling like accusatory bells, and sold at dawn to Louisiana's sugar hells. Word drifted back 6 months later on the whispers of traitors, Nathan dead, his body broken in the cane fields where the average soul endured but 7 years before succumbing to exhaustion, disease, or despair. His grave? Unmarked, swallowed by the bayou's maw, a warning carved into every enslaved heart: challenge authority, assert knowledge, and invite oblivion. Yet, countering these tales of terror were the sacred narratives passed in the quarters under starlit canopies, where fireflies danced like wandering spirits and the night air carried scents of pine and sweat-soaked earth. Elders, their voices low and rhythmic as ancient drums, spoke of healers who defied the veil between life and death. There was Aunt Hattie, who midwifed births in moonlit cabins when white doctors deemed black lives unworthy of the journey, Uncle Josiah, who brewed salves from willow bark and elderberry to mend wounds that festered like unconfessed sins, and countless others whose herbal lore roots dug under full moons, leaves steeped in prayers, kept fevers at bay and children breathing through winters sharp as knives. This knowledge thrived in the shadows. Unacknowledged by the masters who profited from sturdy bodies, yet real as the blood in veins. It was a spiritual inheritance, a thread connecting African ancestors to American soil, symbolizing redemption amid ruin. Jonas felt it in his bones, healing as an act of holy resistance, a quiet revolution against the pharaohs of plantation life. Margot's ghost loomed largest in these reflections. Her life, an odyssey of survival through the Middle Passage's floating tombs, Saint-Domingue's revolutionary fires, and fever-scorched plantations, embodied resilience forged in divine crucible. She had outwitted Yellow Jack thrice, her remedies a covenant with nature's gods, defying European science that bled bodies dry. "The fever is judgment," she'd whispered one evening, her eyes reflecting the campfire's glow like polished obsidian. "For greed, for chains, for souls sold like cattle. But the earth gives weapons to the faithful." Pressing her pouch into his hands, She had entrusted him with this arsenal: cinchona bark as bitter as betrayal, roots to anchor wandering spirits, seeds to quell internal storms. To hoard it now, as Natchez drowned in death, would be to betray her legacy, a sin heavier than any whip slash. On the night of June 28, as thunder rumbled distant like God's discontent, Jonas acted. Dr. Graham had departed hours earlier, his horse's hooves fading into the dusk, leaving the isolation cabin a ramshackle hut of weathered planks and thatched roof at the quarter's edge. Inside, 3 men writhed on straw pallets, their skins slick with sweat, eyes yellowed like forsaken gold, breaths ragged as torn sails. The air reeked of bile and despair, mosquitoes whining like accusatory demons. Jonas prepared the elixir under cover of darkness, the small fire in his cabin casting elongated shadows that danced like specters on the walls. He measured cinchona shards with precision born of memory, not too hot, lest the spirit flee, not too cool, lest it slumber. Mixed with fever root and anti-vomit seeds, the brew steamed aromatic, a pungent incense challenging the plague's miasma. Slipping to the cabin near midnight, when Tolbert snored in whiskey-soaked stupor and the plantation slumbered uneasily, Jonas administered the doses. Spoonfuls forced past cracked lips, explanations omitted in urgency. He vigil kept through the witching hours, wiping brows with cool rags, dosing anew as moons arced overhead. Dawn broke gray and heavy, revealing miracle. 2 men's fevers ebbed, delirium retreating like receding tides. The third, too far claimed by shadows, slipped away with a final rattle. 2/3 saved against Graham's 0. Over the next 3 days, Jonas expanded his clandestine ministry, treating 12 more in the quarter's hidden corners. He moved like a phantom, blending into routines of tending the sick, attributing recoveries to Graham's care while his pouches emptied. Of 15 under his hand, 11 rose anew, their bodies mending as if touched by grace. The 8 subjected only to bloodletting and mercury? 2 survived, young bucks whose vigor withstood the assault. Whispers rippled through the enslaved like underground streams, eyes met Jonas's with reverence, hands brushed in silent thanks. They saw him as vessel, a modern Moses wielding staffs of bark against Pharaoh's plagues. Even James Fairmont, on July 3, remarked to Tolbert over brandy on the veranda, its white columns gleaming like hypocritical pillars of righteousness, that the fever waned at Fairmont, crediting Graham and the Lord's favor. Jonas, fetching water nearby, his bucket heavy as unspoken truth, bowed his head and held his tongue. Inside, a fire kindled, pride in salvation, dread of exposure. Meanwhile, Natchez descended into apocalyptic torment, the river's bluffs now ramparts against an invisible siege. By early July, over 150 lay cold in hastily dug pits, the cemetery's earth churned like battlefield mud. Fear paralyzed the city, affluent families fled in carriages piled with silver and silks, abandoning enslaved staff to fate's lottery. Those remaining barricaded in mansions, windows shuttered against bad air, rooms hazy with sulfur smoke and camphor sacks dangling like talismans. Streets, once bustling with parasol-twirling ladies and merchants' calls, echoed only with death carts' creaks, wooden wagons hauled by masked men, bodies stacked unceremoniously, limbs akimbo in rigor. Natchez under the hill fared worse, a Sodom of vice where fever raged unchecked. Dock workers collapsed mid-haul, prostitutes wilted in brothels' dim lanterns, gamblers folded at tables with final breaths. A warehouse-turned-hospital overflowed, moans harmonizing with river laps, rats scurrying over cooling flesh, mosquitoes breeding in puddles like legions of locusts. The stench, decay mingled with mud and effluent rose as a foul prayer to indifferent heavens. The medical board convened in a stifling chamber, maps splayed like battle plans, faces gaunt from sleepless vigils. Dr. Howell, patriarchal and unyielding, championed bloodletting's purge, his lancet a scepter of authority. Fletcher pushed calomel doses, mercury's silver promise turned toxic. Young Dr. Martin Chambers dared murmur dissent, perhaps our methods weaken them further? Only to be silenced by elders' scorn. To question science was to court heresy, eroding public faith in educated guardians. Pride, that ancient serpent, coiled tight around their hearts. Then, on July 8, providence or temptation intervened. Isaiah, enslaved carpenter to the Pritchards in Natchez on the Hill, succumbed to the fever's grip. The Pritchards, pillars of society with a columned home overlooking the river, had buried their son days prior, his youthful frame wasted in a velvet-lined coffin. Mrs. Pritchard, her lace handkerchief sodden with grief, wailed at losing another Isaiah, skilled artisan of 12 years, valuable as property yet human in her shadowed conscience. Mr. Pritchard summoned Fletcher, blood drawn in crimson arcs, calomel forced down, isolation in a backroom chilled by feudal baths. 24 hours later, black vomit heralded doom, Fletcher whispered defeat. In desperation's hour, Ruth, the Pritchard's laundress, her hands raw from lie, acted. Kin to Jonas from Louisiana roots, she navigated the enslaved grapevine, tales of Fairmont's miracles, survival rates defying odds. Risking lashes or sail, she trekked 10 miles under star-veiled skies, dodging patrol's lanterns. Finding Jonas in the quarters, amid cricket symphonies and firefly glows, she knelt, "Save him, brother, before the Reaper takes." Jonas's soul wrestled, leaving without pass? Treating against doctor's orders? A noose awaited. Yet Ruth's tears mirrored Margot's dying plea, "Save them." He nodded, preparing vials in his cabin's gloom, essences glowing faintly in moonlight like holy oil. July 10th, Jonas traversed forests paralleling the road, branches clawing like accusing fingers, owls hooting omens. At the Pritchard's rear door, Ruth ushered him to Isaiah's chamber, stench assaulting like brimstone, body a skeletal shadow on sweat-soaked sheets. Black vomit pooled, eyes hollow as judgment's voids. Margot's words echoed, 1 in 4, once the darkness flows. Jonas administered swiftly, elixir trickling past lips, instructions to Ruth precise as scripture, doses timed by candle burn, hydration measured, signs watched like prophetic stars. Before dawn's betrayal, he vanished into night, returning to Fairmont as the work bell tolled like a summons to trial. 2 days of torment followed, fields blurred in worry, every rustle a potential accuser. July 12th evening, Ruth reappeared, Jonas's heart plummeted, expecting calamity. But joy lit her face, alive. Fever broken, vomit ceased. Asking for broth. Mrs. Pritchard, witnessing resurrection, probed origins. Ruth feigned divine intervention, but suspicion lingered. She knows, Ruth confided. Wants you. Says if you saved him, save others. Cold dread settled in Jonas's chest, a Rubicon crossed. Exposure meant chains or worse, yet refusal condemned hundreds to graves. Tell her I'll come, he said, voice steady as faith. But she must shield me from doctor's wrath. Ruth departed. 2 days later, assurance returned, Pritchard's word as bond, safety guaranteed, mission to heal the city. On July 15th, Jonas entered Natchez openly, pouch at side, spirit armored in purpose. No inkling then of the 300 lives he'd redeem, nor the enemies brewing, doctors viewing him as usurper, masters as threat to order. His path, a spiritual odyssey, mercy clashing with malice, redemption wrestling retribution in a plague-torn Eden. By late July 1822, Natchez teetered on the knife edge of apocalypse and awakening. The yellow fever's grip had loosened not from the lancets and mercury vials of the city's elite physicians, but from the quiet, methodical hands of Jonas Ryder. Mrs. Eliza Pritchard, a woman whose name carried weight in the marble halls of Natchez on the Hill, had become his unlikely shield. Her husband Charles, a cotton baron with seats on the city council and ledgers thick with enslaved labor's profits, owned vast holdings along the bluffs. When Eliza flung open the doors of their grand home, its columns gleaming white as false purity, its parlors scented with rosewater and beeswax, to an enslaved healer, society took notice. It was not charity, it was desperation veiled as benevolence. Isaiah's resurrection had pierced her armor of grief, she had watched her son waste away under proper care, his final breaths rattling like accusations against the medical gods she once trusted. Now, she saw in Jonas a force more potent than any degree from Pennsylvania or Edinburgh. Word spread first through the invisible arteries of the enslaved networks, kitchen whispers, laundry line murmurs, stable hand nods, faster than any newspaper could print. Jonas Ryder from Fairmont is in the city, the messages traveled. He treats the fever, and folks live. Curiosity morphed into quiet pilgrimage. Desperate mistresses sent trusted servants, those whose deaths would grieve but not scandalize, to summon him. Jonas moved like a specter through back doors and servants' entrances, his presence authorized by frantic owners who cared less for law than for life. He treated household enslaved first, cooks felled mid-kitchen, maids shivering in attics, coachmen collapsed in carriage houses. These were expendable in the eyes of the law, yet irreplaceable in the machinery of wealth. Jonas worked with the precision of a man who knew his time was borrowed. He explained little to white faces peering from doorways. Instead, he trained the enslaved caregivers, those who would remain when he was gone. Dina, a laundress with steady hands and sharper memory, learned to boil cinchona bark over low flames, timing the steep by the length of a candle's burn, never scorching the precious alkaloids that quelled the fever's fire. Benjamin, broad-shouldered coachman, memorized the fever root's twisted shape, digging it from damp riverbanks under moonlight to avoid patrols. Old Clara, her eyes clouded but mind clear as river glass, mastered dose timing, every 4 hours when the chills raged, halved when sweat broke like grace. Jonas drilled them relentlessly: repeat, demonstrate, correct, until the knowledge embedded like scripture in their souls. He insisted on mosquito barriers too, smoldering herb bundles to drive away the bad air carriers, cloths soaked in neem oil draped over beds, stagnant water drained from cisterns and flower pots. No one questioned why. Results were sermon enough. Of the first 20 souls he touched, directly or through his disciples, 16 rose from their pallets, fevers shattered, strength returning in slow, grateful waves. The city's doctors averaged 70% mortality under their aggressive purges. Jonas's shadow ministry defied it with 80% survival. Word escalated from whispers to urgent requests. Families dispatched messengers to Fairmont, offering coin to James Fairmont for Jonas's loan. Fairmont, ever the opportunist, sent it profit, $5 per patient, a fortune in an era when enslaved labor rented for pennies a day. He granted permission temporarily, revocably, turning Jonas into lucrative chattel. The bargain was infernal. Jonas's healing enriched his master, yet it granted him fragile mobility through Natchez's fevered streets. Legally, an enslaved man practicing medicine remained a crime, punishable by sale south or worse. But epidemic chaos bent rules, pragmatism trumped precedent. By late July, Jonas treated 10 to 15 new cases daily. He rose before false dawn, pouch slung beneath his shirt like a hidden Bible, moving through fog-shrouded alleys where death carts still rumbled. Ruth or another trusted soul shadowed him, vouching for his authorization. Sleep came in snatches on porches or stable lofts. Food was whatever grateful hands pressed: corn pone, smoked fish, weak broth. Exhaustion carved hollows under his eyes, yet his hands never faltered. The death rate plummeted, from 20 or 30 daily in mid-July to under 10. Natchez breathed easier, the river's bluffs less haunted by funeral bells. Coffin makers idled, churches emptied of constant mourners. This respite ignited fury in the medical board. On July 23, Dr. Cornelius Hull, 60, silver-haired, his University of Pennsylvania diploma framed like Holy Writ, entered the Montgomery mansion to find Jonas already there. Mrs. Montgomery, once jaundiced and delirious, now sat propped on pillows, sipping broth, color returning to her cheeks. A house servant explained, Jonas Ryder treated her 2 days. Fever broke last night. Hull examined her, pulse steady, eyes clearing, and rage ignited, not gratitude. Not scientific curiosity. Rage. An illiterate field hand undermining decades of learned authority? Families turning to superstition over lancets? His expertise publicly scorned? Hull stormed to an emergency board meeting July 24 in the council chambers, oak-paneled walls closing like a judgment hall. He paced, voice tight, an enslaved man, no training, no license, dispensing unknown herbs, poison, perhaps. Patients survive by chance, yellow fever's courseberries. This endangers public health, erodes our profession. Dr. Fletcher, who had watched Isaiah die then revive, ventured that results spoke louder than theory. Shouted down. Young Chambers proposed observation, study the methods, perhaps integrate value. Met with scorn, a slave teaching doctors? The vote, 5-1 to petition the council banning Jonas. The letter, sealed with waxen indignation, cited illegality, danger, the sanctity of professional standards even amid plague. Mrs. Pritchard delivered the news July 26 that Jonas's makeshift lodgings in Natchez under the hill, a sagging boarding house reeking of tar smoke and river damp. She found him grinding bark, mortar thudding rhythmic as a heartbeat. They'll stop you, she said. Arrest, return to Fairmont, or worse. Howell wants an example. Jonas's hands paused, fear climbing his spine like ivy. 2 days until council decision. He knew the tolls drop, knew pride would ignore it. What if I continue, he asked. Her face darkened, they'll kill you to preserve order. But Jonas calculated in souls, 15 daily, 75% survival over 300 in a month. 300 graves if doctors reclaimed dominance. His life against theirs. I need to speak to the council, he said. Explain. Show results. Pritchard stared. You're enslaved. They won't admit you. Then you do it, Jonas urged. You, the families I've saved. Tell the truth. Survival rates. Lives over pride. She was silent, then nodded. I'll rally them. She left to muster support Montgomerys, Harrisons, Caldwells, Judge Fairfax, his daughter lost to bloodletting, others scarred by traditional failures yet blessed by Jonas's intervention. Jonas resumed preparations, cinchona dust coating his fingers like sacred ash. Margot's whisper echoed, Sauve less. Nathan's 3 seconds of defiance flashed triumph before crushing. Patience's yellowed eyes pleaded. I already have enemies, he murmured. The system itself. But I have knowledge. I'll use it while breath remains. July 28 dawned humid, council chambers filling with powdered wigs and tense murmurs. Routine items dispatched quickly, the petition loomed. Howell spoke 20 minutes illegality, danger, superstition threatening civilization. We cannot allow untrained slaves to dictate health based on plant mixtures without foundation. Then Eliza Pritchard rose. Silence fell like a shroud. Women rarely spoke here, contradicting doctors, unheard of. Yet 8 families stood with her, bereaved, grateful, defiant. Council members, she began, voice clear over rustling papers, we come not to challenge science, but to present undeniable facts. She recounted Isaiah, diagnosed July 8, bled in mercury by Fletcher, doomed by July 9. A different treatment July 10. Fever broken July 12. He lives. Others followed testimonies of recoveries where doctors foretold death. Survival rates laid bare, Jonas's 80% against the board's 30. This is not superstition, Pritchard declared. It is salvation. Pride must not condemn hundreds more. The chamber stirred murmurs of awe, anger, calculation. Jonas waited outside in shadows, unseen yet present, his fate hanging on voices once deaf to his kind. The plague's shadow lingered, but so did the light of forbidden mercy. Would authority yield to evidence, or crucify the healer to preserve its throne? The council chamber on July 28, 1822, smelled of polished oak, tobacco smoke, and the faint metallic tang of fear. Sunlight slanted through high windows, carving sharp rectangles across the long table where 9 councilmen sat in their starched collars and powdered dignity. Maps of Natchez yellowed on the walls, the river drawn as a sinuous vein feeding the city's wealth. But today the maps were forgotten, the true geography was one of power, prejudice, and plague. Mrs. Eliza Pritchard's voice still echoed from her testimony, Isaiah alive, Mrs. Montgomery recovering, the Harrison daughter spared where their son had not been. She had spoken facts like scripture, 70% mortality under the board's protocols, 75% survival under Jonas's hands. Not coincidence. Results. Divine arithmetic. Judge Samuel Fairfax rose next, his face gaunt from grief that had carved permanent lines around his eyes. His daughter Ella Lenina, 19, radiant, promised to a future of silk gowns and garden parties, had withered under Dr. Fletcher's relentless bloodletting. Her final hours, black vomit staining lace pillows, eyes the color of spoiled butter, breath a rattle that haunted his nights. Yet the neighbor's daughter, same age, same fever, had been treated by Jonas on the 11th hour. She lived. Fairfax's voice cracked only once. I buried my child trusting the best medicine money could buy. I will not bury more because we fear the source of mercy. Charles Pritchard, Eliza's husband, and a council member himself, spoke with the measured calm of a man accustomed to command. His cotton empire spanned thousands of acres, built on backs like Jonas's, yet here he stood on the edge of heresy. Gentlemen, we are asked to choose, law's letter or life's breath. An epidemic has claimed over 200 souls in 6 weeks, families erased, fortunes faltering, the riverboats shunning our docks. If we ban the one intervention that turns graves into recoveries, we become complicit in every death that follows. Propriety is precious, but posterity will judge us by bodies in the ground, not by who held the remedy. The chamber erupted. Voices clashed like swords. Traditionalists, planters, merchants, men whose worldview rested on immutable hierarchies argued that exceptions bred chaos. Allow an enslaved man to heal today, and tomorrow he might demand rights, literacy, freedom. The social order is God's design, one thundered. Break it here, and the floodgates open. Others, scarred by personal loss or moved by pragmatism, countered fiercely, evidence outweighed tradition. We are not debating philosophy, a younger councilman snapped. We are counting corpses. Dr. Cornelius Howell rose last for the board, his silver hair catching the light like a halo of false sanctity. His voice carried the weight of 30 years' practice, yet trembled with something raw humiliation. This is not about one man's herbs, he said, eyes sweeping the room. It is about the foundation of civilization. Centuries of accumulated wisdom, Hippocrates, Galen, Rush teach us to purge corruption, to bleed the poison blood. What this individual offers is untested, uncontrolled. Perhaps addictive. Perhaps lethal in time. To elevate superstition over science is to invite long-term ruin. And to permit an enslaved Negro to practice a profession reserved for educated white men? It strikes at the very order that sustains us all. He did not say white supremacy, but the implication hung heavy as incense smoke. The vote was called. 9 men, 1 ballot each. The clerk's quill scratched like judgment's stylus. 5 ayes to allow Jonas to continue under Fairmont's supervision, temporary, epidemic bound. 4 nays. A margin thin as a lancet's edge. The petition denied. Howell stood abruptly, chair scraping like a curse. His face darkened to storm cloud purple. You will regret this, he said, voice low and lethal. When patients waste from unknown poisons, when relapses claim what the fever spared, when law crumbles because we bowed to necessity over principle, you will remember this day. He strode out, 3 board members trailing like fallen apostles. Only Fletcher and Chambers remained, their expressions conflicted but resolute. Fletcher approached the Pritchards afterward in the corridor's dim hush. I wish to learn, he said quietly. Show me what he does. I want to save lives, not egos. The epidemic dragged into August, but its venom was drawn. Jonas, now sanctioned however grudgingly, moved openly through Natchez. He trained 24 enslaved caregivers, exact bark measurements, route identification by touch and darkness, dose timing by pulse and breath. To his astonishment, white physicians came too. Fletcher proved diligent, notebook in hand, observing cinchona decoctions simmered at precise warmth, questioning ratios, noting how patients' vomiting eased without mercury's corrosive burn. Chambers embraced prevention, mosquito veils, smoldering sage bundles, drainage of standing water. Neither fully grasped the vector, science lagged decades behind, but both saw efficacy undeniable. Their survival rates climbed overnight. Howell and the old guard clung to tradition. Lancets flashed in candlelit sick rooms, calomel forced down throats until gums bled silver. Their patients died in waves, yet they blamed virulent strains, never the method. Word spread, request Fletcher or Chambers if you wanted to live. The conservatives dwindled to die-hard loyalists, their parlors echoing with final gasps. By late August, cooler winds swept downriver, thinning mosquito swarms. Jonas's treatments, combined with rudimentary barriers, broke the plague's spine. The final toll, 287 dead. Harrowing, yet Fletcher's private ledger estimated 250 to 300 spared by the intervention, a silent rebuke to every bowl of drained blood. September 4, the council declared the emergency ended. In a special session, Charles Pritchard rose. We owe gratitude, he said, voice carrying across the hushed room, to one who, without letters or license, preserved more lives than all our physicians combined. The words were careful, qualified, hierarchical. Jonas was thanked, not emancipated. Acknowledged, not elevated. His methods noted in private journals, whispered in grateful homes, but never enshrined. Fairmont kept ownership, the healer returned to the fields. Dr. Howell never uttered Jonas's name again.
He practiced until 1830, his obituary lauding him as Natchez's medical pillar, silent on the fever, the deaths, the enslaved man he tried to silence.
Jonas resumed bondage at Fairmont, dawn to dusk cotton, scarred back, unbowed spirit. No freedom, no coin beyond what enriched his master. Yet in the quarters, he became legend. Stories pass like contraband, how bitter bark bested mercury, how one man's memory outshone degrees, how truth needed no permission. He trained quietly, daughters learning rude lore, sons memorizing doses under starlight. The network endured, healing in shadows long after the fever faded. Jonas lived to 63, a miracle span for the enslaved, dying in 1851.
He witnessed cotton's empire swell, slavery harden, war's embers kindle. Freedom arrived 12 years too late.
But the Emancipation Proclamation echoed names like his, those who healed without chains, who knew without sanction. History's ledger is cruelly selective.
Natchez's 1822 epidemic is documented: death counts, board minutes, council votes. Yellow fever's horrors, bloodletting's failures, cinchona's quiet efficacy, all recorded. But Jonas Ryder? Absent from ledgers, invisible in archives. Enslaved lives were property, their deeds footnotes at best, erased at worst. The silence was intentional. To admit black intellect threatened the myth of inferiority that justified chains. Yet absence is not negation. Countless healers, nameless, like Jonas or bearing different names, wielded similar wisdom: African pharmacopoeia, Caribbean survivals, observed truths. They saved in secret because acknowledgement endangered the order. The erasure was the point. 300 lived because one refused to let ignorance crowned as expertise decide who deserved breath. The fever passed. Doctors resumed routines. In the quarters, they remembered. They still do.